Kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. G'day, George.
Hello.
G'day, mate. How are you?
When you say that, reminds me of when I hear you on your ads on the radio.
Oh,
G'day,
g'day, Sneeden. Lovely to see you again today. It's funny when you do that. The weirdest thing is when you start working in that world, when you hear yourself on the radio, or you hear, or your kids hear you. You're driving in the car and your voice comes on the radio and the kids hear you. And it's even funnier. The only thing funnier is when they hear you, and they don't realize it is you. That's actually, I find that's funnier. So yeah. G'day, man. How you doing? Lovely to be with you. How are you? You've been good? Things life?
Yeah.
Well?
Yeah, everything's good. Just not up to much. I am very excited for obviously the show tonight, but after the show,
good save. Hey, good save. Yeah, good save.
At midnight, Artemis 1, NASA's new space launch system is getting its first test launch. It's the first time we'll see this rocket performing. And it's what they'll hopefully one day use to put people on the moon.
Wow,
yeah.
It's funny that whole moon thing.
I mean,
you know this. You know that I like the old life around flat earthers and stuff. And flat earthers always go, oh, did you hear when NASA said they don't have the technology anymore to get to the moon? It was all from the 1960s. They don't have it anymore. I was talking to a guy once and I said to him, remember in the old days, you used to have those rolling music would play on those rolling things, and they have the little things that go blink, 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 and they'd spin those metal drums. I said, if I handed you one of those, have you got the technology to make that 1800s thing work? They're like, well, no. Well, that's exactly the point. It's not that you couldn't rebuild it or remake it, but old technology becomes obsolete for a reason. Then actually you haven't got the capacity to use it again. So that's interesting that they're going back to the moon. So it's a whole brand new thing. I wasn't even entirely sure about that.
Yeah, I mean it's been a fuck around. There's been delays and all sorts. This has been in the works for years and keeps getting delayed. Usually because Congress, 1 year is into space and then the next year isn't into space, and yeah.
I'll tell you what, speaking of Congress, I've been looking over the weekend as to what's happening in America with the elections, upcoming midterms, and it's looking, you never know what's quite going to happen, but basically at one stage it was looking like a 70 or 80% chance that the Republicans were going to take both the Senate and the House. And actually, it looks like the Senate will probably, at the moment, the way it's looking, end up staying with the Democrats, which will stop everything. And if they get 2 more seats, and they've already flipped one, if they get 2 more seats by November, they'll be able to codify things like Roe versus Wade and that sort of thing again. So actually, it's a fairly historic time. And it looks like we talked about this, George. I always forget whether you were on or Chewy was on, or maybe both of you. But we said when Roe versus Wade got overturned, this could make an impact for the midterm elections in America. And it looks like that it actually is starting to make an impact, because those people who are sitting on the fence, who are those swing voters, who are female, are going, what the fuck? And they're giving the Democrats their votes. And there's very, very little to no chance, like only a 20% chance that they'll keep Congress. But if they keep one of the houses, it's almost unprecedented, because basically the White House loses both of those parts of government in their first set of midterms. So if it doesn't happen, it's going to be really rare and really, really interesting. Really, I think we should probably start a GoFundMe to get ourselves over to America to, do Big Hairy News from over there during the midterms. George, what do you think? You down?
Yeah, if they let us in. Or if the place still exists when we get there.
They might have your name on lists. Is that what you're saying? Your name might pop up on a few lists if we try and get over there?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they care about the smallest thing as well. I've always wondered if I could get in. I think land border from Canada is probably the easiest way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always look up through. I think it's Vermont. It's the very, very top up by the Canadian border, and they've got these big, road, road crossings where you can go over at the border. But if you actually have a look at the border, if you go into Google Maps and you zoom into the American-Canadian border and you zoom right in, there's dozens of little roads that go across the border, and they do have cameras and they do have things like that go around there. But I tell you what, I think if you wanted to, you could probably get between those two places pretty easily by the amount of land there is to cross over that border between the two. Maybe most people would want to cross from America to Canada, but if you wanted to come the other way, you could. Hey, got an interesting show tonight. Got a guest coming up very, very shortly. There was an interesting conversation this morning with the Prime Minister on the AM show talking about, I want to get the name of this legislation right, George. It is called the Accreditation Employer Scheme. And it's where employers are needing to get accredited at the moment to actually be able to bring people in from overseas in particular. Now, there was a big story made about what's happening up in Queenstown. We are, of course, Dunedin-based. For those of you who don't know who are just joining us, we're letting you know. So Queenstown's it's kind of like our little big brother, because it's much smaller than us, but, there's far more money up there and stuff as well. So it's like there's a little big brother up there. And so we have organised actually to have Olivia Wednesday, who's a good friend of the show, who's been on a few times. And those of you remember the story about, what's the name of the place I'm looking for, George, over on the West Coast? Gloria Vale. That was with Olivia. She's the person who helped people escape from Gloria Vale. And this time around, she's actually running for Queenstown Mayor. And so we thought, let's give her a call. She'll have her finger on the pulse. We'll talk a little bit about the accreditation issue, about the staffing issue, and also maybe a smidge about local body politics as well. She's due to come through any second now, so we'll jump into that when she comes through. After that, we're going to have a look at a conversation that Christopher Luxon had with the press gallery, or at least with journalists that were following him in the weekend. And I've got a bit of a game to play. It's something like this. Can you identify what the latest National Party PR people say you should be pushing, Mr. Luxon? What words, what themes, what series of words should you be pushing? Because what happens within certainly centralized government, probably local body as well, is they have a group of people around who write speeches, who formulate the way they should be talking, what they should be saying, and they come out with a strategy for how they're going to move forward. And it's fairly obvious to me, at least, and I think I'll provide evidence for that because we like evidence in this show, that the new strategy for the National Party is a somewhat tried and true strategy. However, we'll see if you can pick up on it when we play some clips for you coming up about that. And also, this is not the strategy, but Christopher Luxon was this close, in my opinion, to saying we need to make New Zealand great again. And I was like, whoa, it's like he didn't use those words, but thematically, he was very, very close to attempting to say we needed to make New Zealand great again. And I just wonder if that was a slip of the tongue, or maybe there's a strategy there as well. Perhaps there's a pitch to a group of people. Also, the Sharma Drama continues. Everyone thought the Sharma Drama was over, but actually there was an event that happened later this afternoon where actually Gaurav Sharma has ended up re-traumatizing a bunch of the staff that he'd allegedly already traumatized, and breached confidentiality of some of those staff again in a 4,700 word Facebook post as well. So, lots going on tonight. And before we get into it, let's share a bit of a more lighthearted one, because this is kind of beautiful, actually, as we wait for Liv to jump in and join in. A piece on Twitter, which I particularly enjoyed today, from Marama Davidson, where she said, well, she didn't say this, but she intimated it, fucking don't even like this flavor, but like Whittaker's New Zealand chocolate and love Reo Maori. And that she shared that as a lovely photo, and it's a New Zealand company, and it's Maori language, and putting it out there. So of course, what happens, George? Some of the trolls came out.
Yeah,
I guess the biggest troll came out. Cameron Slater came out. Have you read the Cabinet Manual 2.99? No minister should endorse in any media any product or service. So that was Cameron Slater's response to Marama Davidson, light-hearted sort of look at the world and what's going on at the moment. Marama Davidson's response, of course, was absolutely brilliant, and a perfect counterpoint made. Are you the actual Cameron Slater? Because if so, None of us ministers can promote this innocent reo chocolate as effectively as you have. End of conversation. So yeah, that was beautiful. I like that. It was well done. We always like a little bit of fun, a little bit of sparring as we go on. All right, let's have a look at this conversation about what's happening up in it's actually happening all over the country. George, you've done a little bit of looking into the idea of what the new accreditation employee scheme is. It seems to me, see if I've got this right, George, that it's a new scheme that's been brought in to help get staff, especially from overseas, to come to New Zealand to fill a whole lot of gaps. That's what we're talking about, basically, isn't it? It's about international people to come to the country and fill some of the holes we've got in our job calendar, our workforce at the moment. And there are a bunch of people saying it's not really working. And there are others who are saying this shouldn't be brought in now because it's a new thing and it's adding another layer of bureaucracy to what's already a struggling industry, because we've just been through COVID. We're already struggling. We don't need any more. I thought this was an interesting comment from Marissa Bidouin, Chief Executive of the Restaurant Association. She said that members' frustrations were specifically about delays in New Zealand processing of accreditation at the job check stage. The other major issue that has been raised is around a qualification being a requirement for chefs, with experience not being considered as a marker of skill. And this doesn't always translate in our industry, she said. We see chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants, which are like what's his name? I was going to say Graham Norton, that guy who does all those TV shows, his ones, and all those big flash chefs have Michelin-star restaurants, being turned down if they do not have a qualification. We raised these complaints with the immigration minister when we met 2 years ago, and he gave us his assurance that he would look into this. Prime Minister was on the show AM, the AM show, the breakfast show AM this morning, and they brought on someone from Queenstown who I think runs the Lone Star Cafe. Gordon Ramsay, thanks, Simon. So I was thinking of Graham Henry, something like that. And he brought on someone, they'd just spoken to someone from Queenstown to explain the situation in Queenstown, which I think is probably representative from lots of touristy areas, but Queenstown sort of is a heightened spot for tourism. And this is what the guy from Lone Star in Queenstown had to say, followed on by a bit of conversation between Ryan Bridge and the Prime Minister about this new accreditation scheme.
And I'm actually opening up a door and saying, look, I've got all those tables. I've got plenty of tables. I just don't have any staff. I don't have enough staff to operate at capacity. So we operated off half capacity most nights, and I'm literally looking at my roster every 2 hours, 3 hours, seeing where we can go and what we can handle. It is a bit devastating after having 2 years of no customers to be in the situation.
So the new accredited employer scheme that you have set up, he says, well, one, he hasn't even had time to get himself accredited because he's literally just serving drinks and serving customers in his establishment. So he hasn't had time to do that himself. But the people who have said that it's more paperwork, it's harder, it's fine to become accredited, but once you get to the next step, to the jobs check, things start to get really difficult, and it seems to be taking longer than the old system. Was now the right time to reform in the middle of a labour shortage?
Oh, well, I have to say I've been looking through some of those who are already filling roles or are in the process of have been gone through all those stages, because we've had thousands of employers accredited, we've had thousands now of job checks completed, and I'm now starting to see come through, because this was a recent change, actually the individuals coming in and filling roles, and they include cooks and chefs and so on. And so here, all I could say, Ryan, is I am interested in those personal experiences, because this was designed to be simpler and easier. The thousands of job checks we're having completed and coming through suggest to me that where there are issues, they are being ironed out, because we're starting to see those come through. But always interested to hear that experience on the other side, so that if we can make tweaks to make it as simple as it is intended to be, I'd like to see that happen. The other issue is, of course, down in Queenstown, it's one of those places where usually you'd have a lot of working holiday makers who would be working in the industry. One of the issues is we have thousands of working holiday visas out there. They're being processed within, as little as 10 days for individuals who are applying. The issue is, I expect, a number of those working holiday makers are choosing to stay wherever summer is. So we just haven't had them coming into the country.
No, that's right.
We've just put another 12,000 places out to try and get those moving. We've looked to do surveys to see when people anticipate coming in, and we're doing everything we can to attract those working holiday visas a little earlier.
You mentioned you were watching closely and interested in the number of chefs coming into New Zealand. How many chefs have arrived under the new scheme?
It's such a sad state of affairs, because that's actually a really interesting question about what's going on. And then, of course, Ryan Bridge, as Ryan Bridge always does, gets caught up in the now, how much is a pint of milk kind of question. And it's actually not the conversation, but it's got about 35 seconds. We'll let it play to the end and then talk to the substance of the conversation. Because I think the idea about, at the end of COVID, businesses are struggling. Should we bring in a new legislation now is a really fair question to ask the government. But, how many, Prime Minister, have you looked at your list today to make sure you've memorized it for me? It's just such a fucking stupid question. But anyway.
Oh, I couldn't tell you whether or not they've come in, but I'm starting to see the numbers come through of those.
Important?
No.
Isn't that crucial?
No.
That's the most important thing, is whether they're actually here cooking the eggs.
Well, again, we don't necessarily connect how many, once they've got their visa, they've got their visa. It's whether or not they've then stepped into the country. I don't know whether or not we then are able to tell you the exact moment they begin their employment. But interesting on those lists, they separate out chefs and cooks. I saw, for instance, 100 cooks had already were coming through that system.
So she placates them a little bit towards the end. But yeah, look, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think it's a fair I don't know if it's as far as if it's a criticism, George, but it's a fair question to ask the government. Should we be putting another layer of conditions or bureaucracy or or paperwork, whatever you want to call it, on at a time where we should be making it as easy as businesses to get in as possible? So I think that's a really interesting and fair question to ask. Of course, the ridiculous thing about how much is a one-stage bus fare this day and age is ridiculous. But I also heard a story over the weekend, and it was in the media somewhere, about I think a bar owner in Queenstown, again, saying, I could open my door and I could shout out it's $100 an hour and I wouldn't be able to get people to come and work here. And my first thought was, for someone who is very keen on people to get a living wage and be able to afford to live, like a bar staff that might get paid little, some of them can't afford to live in Queenstown, so they live in surrounding suburbs and drive into Queenstown. Actually, that might be a nice experiment, Mr. Bar Owner. Why don't you offer it at $100 an hour, see if you can get your nightclub or your pub or your bar pumping and see what happens. That might actually be better for everybody. But what are your thoughts, George, around this new legislation and how it's impacting businesses, if indeed it is?
Was that, just before I get into that, was that guy that they showed on the AM show, is he the Lone Star?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So did you see the story that basically I think it was News Hub, went and looked, and he hadn't advertised the job on Trade Me or Seek at all. Right.
No, I hadn't seen that, but I did notice that Ryan had to introduce the conversation with the Prime Minister by saying, this guy hasn't had time to even get accredited. So I'm like, well, so
because part of getting
what's it's the question about the accreditation and the new policies or new legislation or whichever it is, new paperwork, is fair. These other surrounding things that always on the AM show feel like a bit of a gotcha or attempted at a gotcha are kind of, they're distracting from the actual story. So maybe that's a part of it, the distraction.
He wouldn't be able to get, if he hasn't advertised on Seek or Trade Me or whatever since June, according to News Hub, he wouldn't be able to get accredited. It's part of the process of getting accredited that you basically prove that you've been advertising the position for Kiwis, for local Kiwis, blah, blah, blah. The other parts of the program that were introduced, and the reason this program was introduced, Michael Wood came in, took over the immigration portfolio, and part of it is about sort of stopping just importing cheap migrant labor and relying on cheap migrant labor for our jobs, because it may be better if people were paid a bit more. That's really sort of why this came in, and it's got those steps that stop people. This dude complaining when he hasn't even put the job on Trade Me, according to News Hub. yeah, that's the job check part of the thing is where they figure that stuff out.
So again, it's unfortunate, I guess, because it's a distraction from the actual conversation, which again, also I think is valid. I don't know if it's as heavy-handed as critical of the government or fair criticism, but it's certainly a conversation to be had about should you guys be, having businesses jump through more hoops at the moment, like after COVID lockdown and stuff. But there you go. Let me also say that Olivia is not joining us tonight. I've made a blue, obviously, and I think Liv just messaged me saying she thought it was 10 in the morning. So I've made a mistake, obviously not being clear in my communication. But we've basically talked out the story, and I'm sure we'll get Liv on at another stage to talk about it, what's going on. So that's it. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some numbers at the start of August. In terms of this program, 8,000 applications and 7,000 odd of them approved. So I mean that doesn't seem like much of a barrier for most of the people there.
And also, there's going to be, like I think the PM said, and I'm not saying she's right because she was kind of thinking out loud, it would appear, is there's going to be a time period for these numbers to ramp up. Like I heard today them talking about international students, and whoever it was that was speaking, I can't actually remember. I was watching a clip online, someone from government talking about they've received about 50% what they had received pre-COVID applications for student visas. So it's not at capacity, but it's growing, and their expectations it'll be back at 100% by next year. So, like with migrant workers coming here, I mean, I guess Queenstown's a bit different. It's a bit like perhaps, in the middle of the North Island or Kuni, that kind of area is perhaps if people want to ski and work, they'd go there in the winter, but mostly tourists who are going to work tend to arrive in summer and then tour around the country. So probably, within 6 months, we'll see back to capacity, but it's, it's just right now what we can do to help businesses. I love it. It's like, I actually, to be honest, had my first kind of going out, hanging out, went down to Wolf Bar actually in the weekend, took the dog. It was fantastic actually, because the bar's called Wolf, and it means that, they welcome dogs. And so had the dog with me, sitting up on the seat beside me. We had a drink and just kind of hung out for a while. It was lovely. And it's nice to start to get back into, remember after the first lockdown, there was that drive to support your local businesses, and we were phoning businesses around the place. We went and stayed up in Naseby, and we found places that were renting out Airbnbs, and we specifically went to them so we could help them a little bit more. And at that stage, I remember a lot of businesses were saying, well, we normally charge, $300 a night, but if you come up and give us $150 a night, you'll get to come up and, get out of your lockdown. We'll get some money. Everyone will be happy. And it was such a nice sort of community feel. I'm sort of feeling that a bit now about us getting out and getting back into the community and starting to put a bit of those dollars back into these businesses as well. And I'm sure it's been tough, and I'm not minimizing it for Queenstown and other tourist places, but I'm sure if those that are currently in those systems can hang on for the next 3 to 6 months, assuming we don't have another variant rip through, we'll probably be back to pumping like we were, probably.
Yeah. Or those tourist business rely on their, inflated value of their property, and then everything goes tits up. And, I should come to Woof and have a drink. I'll bring my cat along.
Oh, nice. I'm sure that'll be lovely. That'll be great fun.
Just to your $100 an hour point that you said before, the immigration, the scheme requires that you pay them, the immigrant coming, $27 or more, which is, what's that? What's minimum wage at the moment? 22.
22, something like that.
Yeah. So,
but it's not a lot. I mean, the only people who can really relate to cost of living in Queenstown is probably people who live in Auckland. The average house price is about the same. Maybe it's more in Queenstown now, and the cost of living's horrific. It's always one of those sad things when you have to import. I don't mean internationally, but import your workers because they can't afford to live. It's like, you always hear these stories like, this groundskeeper at the beautiful golf course who can't afford to actually play a game on that golf course. It's always a bit. I think that's a bit. It's a bit sad. I actually think it's immoral, to be perfectly honest. It's fairly immoral, that kind of stuff. It's like if your workers can't shop here or your workers can't go here, then there's something wrong with how you've got this place set up, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I imagine you can guess my thoughts on it as well. I mean, with this job stuff, I think I've said before, I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime, and I've heard people nearly twice my age say that as well. With me, I'm sort of almost panicked that I don't get it right and don't sort of take the opportunity that I'm being given in terms of all these, all these different paths I can take. I'm sort of like of the mind that maybe, I should look into, I sort of, what appeals to me more is the more sort of established, I guess, old school kind of institutions like NZ Post or the port, Otago
Yeah.
Port or
Yeah,
these
yeah.
sorts of things are the kind of places where, because everything else sort of, but yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. They say like, we'll train you up and all this stuff. It's an amazing time to be unemployed.
I used to want to, if I could pick a job, even when I was doing other jobs like working in radio or whatever, I used to always think the guy that mowed the grass next to the motorway, those guys that pull up and they back their tractor off and they mow the grass. I always thought that'd be a fucking awesome job. I'd love to do that. It just seems like it's a kind of chill job. You get to have your thoughts and ride your little machine around, and so those jobs I kind of get.
Yeah, for me, machinery or driving would be awesome. Yeah.
Hey, let's have a look at Mr. Luxon, shall we? So we're going to play a game, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't done my normal, incredibly detailed, really got it down to the last second of clips being set up, and you'll see why, because the list of clips looks like this. Who is it out of you two that's normally addicted to tabs? Is it you or is it Chewy?
I have been accused, but I can imagine Chewy. Has a few tabs.
So this is all for one story, right? I think there's 19 tabs opened up here. Because what I want to do is play a little game for you. So you've got the speech writers and the boffins behind the scenes at National Party HQ. My gut is, now, I'm not entirely sure about this, but my gut is they have come up with a new tactic as to what Mr. Luxon should be talking about. And this is specifically to do with youth crime. I'll flick through a few of these. You see if you can pick up on what the new focus is from Mr. Luxon and National.
And the third thing I'd say to you is we just clearly haven't got the appropriate consequences in place for serious offending like we're
1 minute 45.
But we need them to understand there has to be consequences.
2 minutes 12.
What we need to see is, firstly, much more appropriate youth offending consequences.
2 minutes 30.
We know where they go. We know where the consequences of this are.
3 minutes 30.
Really, it's about making sure we've got appropriate consequences.
3 minutes 55.
I can tell you right now, when there are no consequences, and
5 minutes 53.
so we have to have consequences.
6 minutes 15.
It's an important part. You have to be able to be really clear on consequences.
6 minutes 21.
And have really strong consequences as a result.
6 minutes 35.
It's an and, not an or. You want to be really tough on the consequences of crime.
6 minutes 44.
At the moment, you can't say, look, there are no consequences. Let this carry on.
6 minutes 55.
Move back to sending a clear set of consequences.
7 minutes 38.
Make sure there are appropriate consequences. And that's what
7 minutes 48.
we already have a regime with a series of escalating consequences.
7 minutes 50. And at 9 minutes, you get.
And so we're asking for just enforce some consequences and actually make sure you know where your young person is and that you're actually getting them to school.
So, George, I know it's a little bit unclear. I like to be as clear as I can, and I am stretching a little bit, just a little bit. But do you think the boffins behind the scenes might have come up with a message that they want Mr. Luxon to put out there to the public? Like, could you? I know it was a bit subtle, but could you read anything into those clips that I was playing at all?
Yeah, it's the boring old story that we've heard before, isn't it?
That's 15 mentions, 15 times the word consequences when talking about youth crime, 15 times in 9 minutes. So what's that? 15 into 9. That's I don't know. My brain's going a couple of times a minute. 2 9s are 18. But I can read them out to you actually. This is the order, and because I time coded them. 145, 212, 230, 330, 355, 553, 615, 621, 635, 644, 655, 738, 748, 750, 906. Those are the times he used the word consequences when talking about youth crime. Now, he says it's not just about consequences in one clip. It's about working with these young people and making sure their futures are taken care of. He says that once. He says more serious consequences 15 times in 9 minutes. Which do you think is the focus of the National Party? The helping these young people figure out what's going on, get through this, or basically a version of youth lock them up? What do you think? I know what I think. And I think, as George just kind of intimated there, this is National 3.0. This is their tried and true. They've gone back to it, and they're basically saying, hey, we've tried all these other things. Let's try this and see how it rates now. Let's try this and see what it looks like. Ram raids, consequences. Move those shells around again, and we'll see how that lands. He also talked about in this interview, whatever, that one of the things they need to do is get their policies out around gangs. Remember, their policy about gangs was taxing them. That was one of the things they want to do, him and them and David Seymour. But actually, and then also having being able to raid a place with no warrant. That was a National Party, aim against a gang. So, we'll see what it's up to. The other thing that Mr. Luxon talked a bit about in this is first, it's young people need consequences. Second is parents are bad.
Certainly, I think the responsibility of parents to actually step up and do the parenting that they're not doing at the moment, to be able to actually put some structure and some boundaries around these young people's lives is important too. So, really it's about making sure we've got appropriate consequences, implement a gang policy that sends a message that you just can't act with impunity, and then thirdly, make sure we're investing in these young people's lives.
And he goes on within that. I only watched the first 10 minutes because I couldn't handle it anymore, to be perfectly honest with you. He goes on to talk about parents for a second time in that period as well.
There's a parental responsibility here as well, because now we have free lunch programs, we have free breakfast programs, we have free period products, we have subsidies for school uniforms. The responsibility of a parent is to make sure that your kid has opportunities that you didn't have, and education is the way in which you get from bad circumstances to better circumstances. And so we're asking for just enforce some consequences and actually make sure you know where your young person is and that you're actually getting them to school. That's a responsibility of parent. You chose to have the children. You need to be able to make sure that you get them to school. So it's a parental responsibility. Yes, it's a school responsibility. And yes, it's a government responsibility. But all three need to be working really hard on it. And I think truancy is a big, big motivation for why we've seen such a blowout in youth offending here.
I tell you what I thought when I heard this, right? I thought, Destiny's Church has put its hand up. And I just wondered how much of Christopher Luxon's evangelical kind of Christian ideas about what family is and what family should be, this is me just wondering out loud, has popped up, and they've started to drive, maybe this is going to be a message, and maybe that message is going to be, don't vote for those other families, those other parties that are going to be screaming family values. We're the family values. We're all about parenting and good parenting and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a comment I just saw about right here from Jay. Imagine telling a parent during a cost of living crisis and pandemic it's not doing good parenting. We are paraphrasing by saying that's what he said. But yeah, it's like, come on, parents, pick up your job. Come on, get into it. It's your fault. George, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's somehow does the whole personal responsibility thing with the parents, and then chucks in the bigger sort of government thing as well. Here's the sort of best of both worlds going on. I mean, it's a story as old as time, right? I mean, I thought the sort of ram raids whole narrative had sort of fallen away, but I guess it's come up again. And sandwiched in that was the, National Party conference that talked about youth people on the benefit. Family values. That phrase is always a bit suspect, and families are sort of this imagined subject of electoral politics. You'll hear the Labour Party talking about families, whatever that means. I mean, it certainly does bring to mind a certain identity, right? A certain a certain identity that they want to sort of promote. I guess you could say, a healthy white family.
It does make me think about America and about the Republicans and how the Republicans try and quote unquote own family values, as you say, whatever the fuck those are. That normally means, as you say, white, straight, two-parent families. That's what family values typically means. We've got groups in New Zealand like, are they called Family First, whatever it is, the Bob McCroskey group, who talk about family values and then go off about things like LGBT families and that, and they're not to be looked after. I mean, I would constantly say to people like Bob McCroskey, what are you doing for LGBT families? They're families as well, but that's not what they're about. They're basically about their interpretation of what a Christian should and would do and what a family should and would be. Yeah, so like you're saying, whatever that means, what that means normally is to the narrative of the group or person and their ideology, and then they expand upon it, because what is a family? Who knows? You can't. It's pretty hard to define it in an absolute.
We should always ask what they mean by family values as well. And also, yeah.
The American thing as well, though, makes me think about the next clip we're going to play from this conversation, which is, that in America, the evangelical vote is a big vote for the Republicans. It's well known that Christopher Luxon, and more power to him, has a belief or a faith or whatever. The church he went to in Auckland is pretty controversial. The leader of that church, I think, was featured in Spin-Off over the weekend, and a little bit of looking around their social media was talking about how much of a fan they were of Trump and various bits and pieces as well. However, that I'm wondering if there's a synergy between what we're about to play and thinking about America, evangelical voting bloc, right-wing party Republicans, because I have to be honest with you, when I heard Mr. Luxon say this, which I'm about to play for you, I did just think how close that is, right, to let's make New Zealand great again. Like, he doesn't say it, but the themes behind what he's basically about to say made me think, gosh, that's the, in 2 weeks from now, what he says here will be spun into some version of let's make New Zealand great again. So this is the same press conference from a different point, talking about, youth crime and lock them up.
You have to be able to be really clear on consequences, because you can't say this is okay. This is not the New Zealand we grew up in. This is not the New Zealand we grew up in. This is not the New Zealand we want for our future. So one is, yes, you do have to have be.
And I mean, you may disagree with me, right? And I'm aware that it might relate to other people different ways, but to me, it just did sound, it evoked the feeling of this.
Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not saying he said it. I'm not saying he's going to say it that way. But for me, that idea about yesterday was so much better than right now makes me think about that's exactly what that messaging is. Yesterday was the best. Now everything's terrible. Yesterday, way we grew up was better. The summers were hotter and the people were nicer. And now we need to go back to the way it was. I just wonder if there's something in their messaging which will start to evoke that historical look at New Zealand, and then try and bring into, if we could only be like it was, wouldn't it be better? We'll get those values back for you. I'm wondering if that's where they're going to go.
Yeah, the language comes up again, that annoying sort of discourse analysis part of my brain. Here's that word we, this is not the New Zealand that we grew up in. Who's we that's identified in that.
Yeah. So look, read into that as you will. I'm interested. And if I was going to be fair, which I don't feel the need to be, but if I was going to be fair, I'd probably say as well, it was a somewhat impromptu press conference, and we'll see how they expand upon that. But like Carla just said very clearly here, it's a call to nostalgia working on conservative emotions. So if that turns into more messaging, all of these political parties, no matter who it is, they do a huge amount of polling. They have companies that do polling for them. So those messages will be getting polled out this week. What do you think about the tough on crime? What do you think about the soft? Like they talk about Labor and being soft on crime. Is it working? National Party will be asking people, is this working for us? Did you like it? How would you rate it? And you'll find out whether that was something that struck a chord to some if they keep talking about it. Have you noticed that the squeezed middle class has gone away? When did we last hear those words, George? It's been a while, but that was a hard push for a while. My suspicions are that didn't poll very well when they were doing their research, and it's just completely gone. When did we last hear that? It's gone. So now they've gone to what's the next messaging that's going to get us through to the election?
Yeah, it's ironic in a way that they go to that effort with all that stuff, and at the end of the day, it's just these boring old conservative stories. Like, Trump's one is like it's a classic, and it even appeals to people like me or others that might have solidarity with the American worker who, as he details in his inauguration speech, don't have a job anymore because of globalization and neoliberal trade agreements that send those jobs overseas. So they speak to those material conditions and play on their, affective sort of, we're all together as one, play on the anxieties of the other, of the Mexican or the Islamic terrorism and that sort of thing. But as I said, there's still those sort of material conditions at the heart of what they play on. And really, we as the other side just have to sort of tell a better story and in terms of answers for those material conditions.
And look, to be fair, all political parties will do the polling in the background as well. The difference is when you're in opposition, whoever you are, this time it's national, you get to spend all your time looking for your messaging. When you're in government, you have to spend most of your time running the country. You don't have quite the same amount of time to kind of figure out what would be the best way to attack the government when you are the government, because you've got to do other things. Although I did notice today, the Prime Minister had a really bizarre, well, I think it was a bizarre press conference when she was talking about, she basically came out and listed all the things that the ways that they've saved New Zealanders money in this current cost of living crisis. She listed out all these things and then went, oh, now I'll take some questions. And I was like, no, and I kind of thought, I wonder if that's Labor starting to actually go, well, let's now start forming our own narrative in the media. And our narrative is actually people are doing better than they could. She was actually celebrating on some level the 7.3% inflation. Apparently the OECD average right now is 10.5 or something, or 10.9, or certainly over 10. And it was just an interesting dynamic where the Prime Minister was then doing a little bit of that. Here's us, this is who we are, this is what we have done. And I just wondered if it was a bit of a pushback. I thought it was a bit strange because it wasn't actually a press conference on a whole bunch of policy. It really was like 7 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever it was of her saying, this is what we've done for New Zealand to help them financially. Now, are there any questions? So, this is not actually a criticism of National when I say they've got their people behind the scenes, because all the parties do. Just when you're the opposition, you have the chance to throw more mud at the wall to see what sticks. When you're the government, you basically are running on what you've done. It's not like the government can go, well, I think we should do this because they're the government and they should do that. Whereas the opposition parties can go, well, I think we should do this, and it doesn't matter. So they can be just throwing whatever they want. And that's what's happening at the moment. They're testing the sound bites, basically.
Did you put out this comment before? Because this is a really good comment from the
Yeah. My point when I came in.
Right.
So Weaving House got a couple of mentions.
Yeah.
Cool, man. We'll keep an eye on that. And like I said, look, we often talk about walking and chewing gum at the same time. I think that was a weird press conference from the Prime Minister. I don't think it served any purpose other than her putting out a look at us, we're fantastic policy. But then again, maybe that's much like Nationals looking for their messaging, so is Labor. So that was a weird one. But there you go. Let us have a look to sort of wrap up the night, I guess, with I don't believe I'm saying this again, the ongoing GoRav Sharma Drama. And the interesting thing about what's happening at the moment with GoRav Sharma is the people who are unquestionably happiest about this ongoing drama are the Labor Party. Because what has happened again today is GoRav Sharma has come out, and this is fairly, I mean, this was at 8 o'clock tonight. This was put up on New Zealand Herald, so some of you may not have heard this yet. This is another situation where, how do I say this politely but bluntly? I'll just say it bluntly. All the terrible things that Labour was basically hinting at about Gaurav Sharma seem, to me at least, to be confirmed or becoming more confirmed, because everything they said about him and what he was doing, what he was up to, seems to be what he's doing now more and more publicly. So this evening, at least it was reported. In fact, I've got the actual. I need to just take this off for a second because I've had a private message come in. I need to go and close the private message.
Good catch.
Yeah, I saw that private message come in. So I only went up about 4 hours ago. So I've just turned off my private message. So it was only 4 or 5 hours ago that he actually posted it, and it's already been reported on. So it might be new to a bunch of you, that he wrote a 4,700 word Facebook rant, and there are some of his former staffers who are now claiming that rant continues to breach their confidentiality, and some are saying worse than that. Let's have a look at the story from New Zealand Herald. Former Gaurav Sharma staffer urges MP to move on, stop breaching confidentiality after latest 4,700 word Facebook rant. A former staff member of exiled MP Gaurav Sharma says he needs to move on, pardon me, with his life and not post lengthy social media essays. I think that's fairly generous calling this an essay, but good on you. About the alleged poor performance of his former staff. Sharma posted a 4,700 word, I'm going to call it post, about what he alleged was poor performance of his former staff and the way his complaints were handled by Parliamentary Service and the Labour Party. One former staff member, speaking to the Herald anonymously, urged Sharma to move on. Stop dragging this out, they said. This is a breach of our confidentiality. It's bringing up past trauma. We've already lived it once, is what the person said. They go on. It's bringing up past trauma. We've already lived it once. The staffer said that all of the former staff Sharma had fallen out with had kept confidentiality and tried to move on. The episode only hit the public domain when Sharma decided to go public with his own claims of bullying. The staffer said they'd done the right thing by Sharma. It's an interesting perspective. What that kind of says is that maybe things were swept under the carpet, which is a bit of a shame, but that's what they're saying here. They've done the right thing by Sharma, but he had not done the right thing by them. We're all moving on. We kept our end of the bargain and didn't say anything about it, unless, of course, there was a settlement. Because if there was a bargain made, maybe there was a settlement for being, that would be interesting. Because if there was a payment made, for someone leaving under duress, just conjecture, no evidence. But I'm just wondering about that, with their end of the bargain, or it could just be a metaphorical bargain. I told you I wouldn't say anything. Maybe it was that as well. Him bringing it up again triggers me, they said. They alleged the Sharma had been stalking their social media after they left his employment. I kept him on my social media. I kept him there because I wanted him to see that I was moving on with my life. On some platforms, it's possible to see whether someone has viewed a story. The staffer alleges Sharma watched their story after they had fallen out, after they he'd never previously taken an interest in their social media. He full-on stalked all of my stories for a good few months, they said. Sharma denied that he'd been stalking former staff social media. And the last little bit from the story. In a lengthy Facebook post, which we'll show you a bit of, we can't show it, it's 4,700 words. I haven't got a spare 45 minutes to read it to you. In a lengthy Facebook post, Sharma alleges he raised... Now, there's this thing called Occam's razor, yeah? Occam's razor is what... the most likely scenario is more often than not the correct one. That's a paraphrase. What it kind of means is the actual definition of is the fewest number of assumptions to get to the correct answer. So listen to this claim by Sharma and see if it seems credible to you, logical to you. In the lengthy Facebook post, Sharma alleges he raised 66 specific issues about one staffer with their official employer, Parliamentary Services. George, could you ever imagine being in a job that you had so much to do that you could even have 66 complaints about you? Like how many job roles do you have to have 66 complaints about you? To me, that just doesn't seem credible. I don't know, but it doesn't seem credible to me. Most of the allegations relate to what Sharma alleges is that person being poor at their job. Sharma repeated his allegation that Parliament Services had not responded appropriately when Sharma raised issues about a staff member flying to an MP's event. Sharma initially alleged this was a misuse of taxpayers' funds. Parliamentary Service contended it was not. So here is the post. I am not going to read you the post because I don't have enough years of my life left to go through the whole thing. I have had a skim of it though, because you will see with me as we scroll, this is a vast post where he is basically bitching about former employees and telling everybody what's wrong with them. I'm still scrolling if you're listening to the audio, and I'm still scrolling, and I'm still scrolling. I'm still scrolling in case you're wondering, and that comes to the end. A post that he sets up as facts re staffing issues. I highlighted one part of it, primarily to, again, question whether it's a credible claim. Okay. So this is for a staff member who he has identified by their initials, which I won't. Dr. Sharma says this: on one occasion, the staff member was supposed to come to work at 8:30 a.m., but advised me and other staff that due to having an extra university class, they would instead come to work in the afternoon. In the afternoon, they said they would be at work in a few minutes, right? So that's the claim. They said they'd be at work in a few minutes. They didn't show up to work for 30 minutes, an hour, and even 2 hours after they messaged saying they were on their way. So which is it? Did they show up half an hour later, or an hour later, or 2 hours later? If someone shows up late, you don't make it this massive long claim about them without having the facts and figures actually at hand. And that to me just speaks of, in my honest held belief, speaks of someone spinning a story and either misremembering or making up. They didn't show up to work for 30 minutes, an hour, and even 2 hours after they had messaged me saying they were on their way. The last thing I'll say is the actual Sharma makes 5 points at the end and says, my points remain clear. Number one, what is the Prime Minister hiding? And why doesn't she want an investigation? And I think we answered that last time by saying because there's nothing to investigate, allegedly. Well, no, not allegedly. That's what we've been told. Why don't they do an independent investigation? Why don't they independently investigate me about staffing issues so that he can get a fair trial? I guess that's talking about the whip. Why did the Independent Parliamentary Services share with Labour Party the details about my whistleblowing about Parliament's youth misuse of funds, despite screenshots which show that Labour Party caucus members have been bullied by Kieran McCultney? Why would the Prime Minister not do an investigation against this person who she's gone to promote when the Prime Minister said that I would get a fair trial at the caucus meeting? Why did she not mention the predetermined meeting as she'd already set up? And we've talked about all these things already. There's no point, I guess, to really relitigate them other than to say again, George, that I think the people who are happiest about this are probably the Labour Party, because this, I think, is just confirming in many people's eyes what they were saying was the problem with Dr. Sharma within an office situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of inconsistency of it, right? He went from a guy blowing the whistle about caucus bullying, so ministers and members of parliament, and then it became a whole thing about transparency and OIAs, and now it's just him sort of bitching about people who were actually under him in the organisation and knocking on them for being 5 minutes late here and there, and flying to MPs events. So I'm sure they had nothing that they had no say in doing anyway. They were probably told to by their MPs, and now it sort of paints a picture of a guy who blew up and is sort of grasping at straws, and plus sort of admitting that he used to just complain about underlings all the fucking time, which I'm sure everyone can sort of like remember someone in a work that they have who that experience they have had in a workplace where there's just one guy who just like really just sort of takes the rules ultra literally and just every chance he gets knocks on you basically.
Yeah, and I mean, again, can you imagine that anyone would ever have enough input into a business to actually, how do you make 60? Remember, I think wasn't Gaurav Sharma's only been in Parliament for 6 months or something. And in that time, he's managed to make 66 complaints about a staff member. What is that, like a complaint a day? I don't know. It seems problematic to me, those numbers. And the other thing that seems problematic to me is those numbers for him. Surely, if parliamentary services had such a poor pool of people, then why aren't we hearing this from all the other MPs about these terrible staff? Look, I'll be fair and say nobody knows the truth other than the people who are involved. But as I said at the very start of this, I think the people who will be most happy about what Dr. Sharma's up to at the moment is the Labour Party, who are kind of going, see, this is what we were saying. This is what we were saying. Can you see it now? You can all see it now, can't you? You can see it? Okay, you can see it. Yeah. So that's about it for that one. At least you got anything else you want to add to that?
Oh, no. I'd be very happy to see the back of that whole story.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about the breakfast panel last week, talking about it, and they said it probably has damaged Labour a little bit. But I think the more it goes on, I think the more Labour is vindicated. So I don't really think it's helping the situation of, running the country. But I think it's probably every time he does this, in my opinion, it kind of clears their name a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and portrays them as the reasonable ones. This is not the rantings of a reasonable person, in my opinion. This is the rantings of a person who's been portrayed exactly as the staff allegedly has made those allegations about. So, all right. Hey, well, that's us for today. Is there anything in the messaging that we want to get to? Anything we want to put out there that's come in the messages? Anyone want to get a message in the last minute now? Because we are about to wrap up. I'm just having a squiz through as we're talking. What's that big long one off Facebook without a name on it? Here we go. We can't see your names when you're on Facebook unless you put them, unless you have some kind of, anyway, we'll go. What would you expect Luxon to do if not what an opposition does? Well, that's what we're saying. We're not criticizing him for doing it. We're just saying this is what opposition's done, and this is where we're personally, I see the holes. He is, after all, in the opposition. At least he visits the victims of youth crime and ram raids, while the PM isn't seen doing that, is she? I believe she probably has. I actually would need to look that up. So we have evidence that she hasn't done that. I know that she's been to lots of places that have needed work, like she's been in the Nelson region for the floods, and I think she's going back there this week. I heard her calendar today being spoken about. Even if she does, you'll need to get those points out. You'll need to point out those instances, as I'm not really noticeable for most people. It's not really noticeable for most. Sorry, it's my dyslexia kicking in. As for Jacinda actions towards businesses, perhaps ask medium/small businesses how she is actually helping them. Most seem to be not impressed. Big business have a lot. What, you mean like the kind of wage subsidies and the spending hundreds of millions of dollars helping all those small businesses through COVID and all that kind of stuff? That,
I couldn't fucking care less.
and how we have the lowest unemployment pretty much in the world at the moment, and our economy has bounced back a lot better than they said it would. All those terrible things that this government has done, and how ironically it always seems at the end of we can research this and we can show you this. It's ironic, and it may not be the case this time because of COVID. But ironically, if you look back over the previous Labour governments, the economy is always healthier and stuff at the end of it than when you look at the previous national governments. All those kind of little things. But definitely, National is the business party. They're the ones that always leave business in a better state, and Labour's the bad ones. Although the economy is always better at the end of a Labour term. It's weird how that happens, George? Really weird.
I wanted to see what they was going to say. The big businesses have a lot. I was hoping there's going to be more, because
maybe there's a restricted number that can come in on that system. Right. I'm pretty sure I will know where this comment is coming from out of all the Facebook pages. I could go and have a look and see what it says or not. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight, everybody. It's been an interesting night. My apologies about obviously my fault making a bit of a balls up with our guest who was going to come on. Here we go. I found it. Oh shit, there's twice as much. Shall I keep reading it? Big businesses have a lot of leverage that small and medium.
Can we show it on the screen?
I guess so. I mean, the person, maybe I'll just cover their name up just in case they Can I show it?
Well, they wrote
No,
it.
I'm not going to show it. Big business have a lot of leverage that small and medium enterprises don't, and Jacinda's Labor hasn't been helping as much as some businesses would need them to help. Do they have high expectations? Yes, and they should. They are high-performing people, and we should be proud of our businesses.
Yeah.
GoRav has a right to speak. Staffers can argue anything. But do you think he breached any privacy? Well, I think we see pretty clearly what the claim is. That staffers are saying he breached their privacy. And that's what we said at the start of the conversation, and that's what the headline says, that they're claiming.
It's funny because he reminds me of a small business owner.
Goes on to go, I don't think he did. I don't think he did. How do you know that? It's the staff members who are saying it. I don't think he did. And whatever legal understanding I've got, and neither did my GF, my girlfriend, think he did. And she's a law practitioner. That's an adorable comment at the end. A call to what do you call it? A call to authority.
If their privacy hasn't been breached, let's say, in the whole publicly, let's just say that Wellington will know who all these staffers are. You know, all the members of Parliament, all the staffers in Parliament. These people are now in their sort of, everyone in their workplace, will be aware of this, I'm sure.
And so I'm not going to bring it up again, but I'm now turning back to the GoRav Sharma post. And like I said, I did mention that last time. It doesn't really matter. But when he's writing up about those staff members, he's using their initials. So like if it was me, it would be PB dash, then a whole bunch of stuff about my role and what I did. So George is right. If you're within that world, you will know who he's talking about. That to me would be a breach of privacy.
Yeah.
Right. Imagine if it was a very unique name and the surname started with a Z or something, then people will know who that is. Parliamentary services, people will know who that is. That is a breach of services, a breach of privacy. I would say unequivocally, actually. So maybe you didn't have that information to pass on to your GF, who is a legal practitioner, but now you do. All right. Anything you want to add to that, George, before we F off into the night?
Nope.
Just checking if anything else came before that. So this is something we're doing at the moment. We're talking for Dunedin people. We're talking to Dunedin councillors, and Mayoral Hopefuls lined up. Do you have any more conspiracy theorists want to be Dunedin councillors? I will not comment to that, Jay, on the word conspiracy theorists, because I don't want anyone to be seen as me identifying them as that. I'm talking to all of the mayoralty candidates every Saturday and Sunday for the next, I think, 12 years. No, 5 weeks. So I'm talking to all of them. So if any of them are, then the answer is yes. I'm not going to identify who I think is or isn't or could or couldn't be, because I'm talking to all of them every Saturday and Sunday afternoon at 2:00 for the next 4 weekends. Did 2 in the weekend just gone.
I did take issue with your video title that said why conspiracy theorists are always wrong.
Yeah, did you see it though? Did you watch it?
I just read the headline.
Yeah, exactly. So you're part of the problem, George.
But that's an oxymoron. Like we're gonna bring evidence against these guys, but they're always wrong.
But I did say in the piece, look, I actually acknowledged it straight away that I'm saying, I said, and I think what I rephrased it to at the end was are mostly always wrong, are always mostly wrong in their facts and figures, especially when it comes to things like flat earthers and maths. They are always wrong in that instance. So, anywho, thank you for joining us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. I think we're done for now, so we'll just leave.